Hey golfers, it's Dave from Fit2 Golf. This video is about the pros and cons of building irons at 3/8 inch increments rather than the traditional 1/2 inch. Now there is some information you can find online, mainly in club fitter forums, about how to do this and what are some of the outcomes. But I thought I'd put this on YouTube because there isn't much if you do a search on this, and it might help some of the tinkerers and club makers out there who are considering this approach. I also just want to make the disclaimer that I'm not trying to MOI match. There is a procedure called poor man's MOI matching where basically you use 3/8 inch increments between the lengths of clubs and specific head weights and preferably taper tip constant weight shafts, and that's supposed to give the club the same feel in terms of the same amount of force that's required to swing it, and that is the outcome that I'm looking for here, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So let's talk about the build for this demonstration. I took my Moeye STI OS clubs, 6-through pitching wedge, and I pulled out the old XP 95 shafts, and I installed FST 115 steel shafts. I did everything I normally do in terms of shaft prep here. I weight sorted them, I flowed them, and because they're parallel tipped, I frequency matched them to be a firm flex right between regular and stiff. But I didn't do anything to manipulate swing weight. I wanted them to fall just where they would, and you'll see why in just a little bit. So in making these clubs at 3/8 increments, here are the lengths of each club. The 6-iron length is 37 3/4 inches. The 7-iron is 37 3/8. The 8-iron is 37 inches. The 9-iron 36 5/8. Pitching wedge 36 1/4, and the gap wedge 35 7/8. Now, one of the advantages that you notice right off the bat is there is a less dispersion between the length of clubs shortest to longest. So instead of there being 2 inches between this set of clubs, there's about 1.5 inches. And you might not think that's a lot, but I noticed that it didn't require the same kind of fidgeting and changes in terms of posture, setup, and ball position. And some golfers might like that just slight change in length that affords. Now, given that one of the reasons why I made these clubs this way was to enhance the feel of the clubs. Now, part of that is done by just the natural progressive swing weighting that happens. If you look at the data for each club, you can see that there is essentially a 1/2 inch increase in swing weight from the 6-iron down to the gap wedge, with the exception of the pitching wedge. That head was just 1 degree out of spec, and so that boosted it a 1/2 a swing weight value. However, this really feels good when you're swinging the club. You can pick up the 5-iron and the gap wedge, and you can tell that the gap wedge is heavier, but statically. But when you swing it, they feel more similar. And I'll put up just some swings here, so a few swings with a pitching wedge and then to a 6-iron, and I found that progression was very easy. The clubs felt very similar, and I also like that heavier swing weight in the shorter irons because I felt like I could feel the club head and feel my swing, and obviously those are the scoring irons, and you want to be able to swing it where you want it and hit the ball straight, and I found a difference in dispersion. Now, one con that you want to look out for if you're doing this with your clubs is that it affects the yardage gapping. Now, usually what happens with golfers, like me with moderate swing speeds, is that we see a bunching up of yardage gaps at the top end, between the longest irons. However, with this test, I actually saw the gapping kind of bunch up at the shorter clubs. Now, prior to reshafting these irons, I had them gapped at what I would consider the ideal of 12 to 14 yards per club, given the 5-degree loft increments of these modern lofted irons. But after I reshafted them with these 3/8 inch lengths, I saw very different numbers. So after this build, I was carrying the 6-iron at 165, 7-iron at 151, 8-iron at 138, 9-iron at 130, pitching wedge at 111, gap wedge at 107. So basically what I wanted to get the gaps back where I would want is to weaken the 9-iron and the gap wedge and strengthen the pitching wedge. And this isn't a big deal. We're talking about a degree of loft adjustment here. But if you don't have access to a bending machine or a club maker or club fitter who has one, keep in mind that when you do use this approach, if you're reshafting irons, you're probably going to want to go through a gapping test. So I have to say, for me, I really like this build. I like these increments. I like the way the clubs feel. I definitely feel like I'm able to feel the club better, and once I get the gaps worked out, I'm going to enjoy playing these this fall and winter. I'm interested to know if you've tried clubs at this length, at these increments, or maybe you've tried others. There are models out there for 7/16, 3/16, and 1/4 inch, and they all have their disadvantages and advantages, and I'd love to hear from those of you who've experimented with those different increments. So I hope you liked the video. I know it was a little kind of golf geeky, but there are those of us out there who eat this stuff up, so I hope you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't. Get out there, play some golf, and stay positive.